오늘 은혜 받으실 하나님의 말씀은
Today's word of God is in the Old Testament, 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 16. 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 16.
자, 찾으시고 한 절씩 교독하도록 하겠습니다. 열왕기상 16장 17장
1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 16 will responsively read. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kirith Ravin, east of the Jordan. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to Kirith Ravin, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Go once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. As she was going to get it, he called, And bring me please a piece of bread. Elisha said to her, Don't be afraid, go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then take something for yourself and your son. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there were food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. And for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Amen. Let us say hello to each other. Blessing, inadequacy is also a blessing of God. When we read the Bible, we sometimes find the truth of the paradox. So the truth of paradox is on the outside. On the outside, it might not balance out. It might not make sense. However, if you look closely in, it has a deep meaning within that sentence. If you look at Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 3, Joseph was sold to Egypt. However, the Bible describes Joseph, someone who was sold as slave, as someone who had been fulfilled. But that doesn't make sense because Joseph was sold as a slave. However, that's not how the Bible describes it. So that is a truth of paradox. And also, Joseph was also falsely accused of a crime that he never did. However, the Bible describes him as God had allowed him success. Well, that basically means that God has made every one of his way a success. But it doesn't make sense because he was falsely accused and he was in jail. So that is the truth of paradox. And Paul the disciple also said when I'm strong, I'm weak. When I'm weak, I'm strong. Well, that's the truth of paradox also. I'm weak, but how can I be strong?
사랑하는 여러분, 오늘
My
본문의
loving,
내용도 자세히
my loving
들여다보시면
members of church.
사실은
Well, if you
역설의
look
진리를
in
담고 있는
our
말씀입니다.
main, if you
우리가
look in our main,
인간적으로 생각할
main,
때는
if you look in our
많은 것,
main word today,
그리고
there's
풍성한
also
것,
a truth of
그리고 넘치는
paradox.
것을 축복이라고 생각합니다.
We might think
그러나
what is
오히려
overloading and what
축복이 될
is
수 있다고
full
하는
is a
역설의
blessing.
진리를 담고 있습니다. 오늘 본문 1절에 보시면
However,
엘리야
if you
선자가
look in
어느 날
verse 1 of our main word today,
왕이었던 아합을 찾아가서 하나님의 말씀을 전합니다.
Elijah
자,
went to
1절 같이
Ahab,
한번 읽겠습니다.
the king, and delivered the word of God. Let's read verse 1 together. 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 1.
자, 열왕기상 17장 1절 같이 한번 읽겠습니다. 시작.
Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word.
내 말이 없으면 수년 동안
So,
우로가 있지
So
아니하리라.
they will never,
여러분, 우로라는 말은
there won't be
이것은
rain
기쁨만
or
아니라
dew
이슬까지도
within the next
내리지
few
않는
years
아주
except at my
극심한
word.
가뭄.
So there will be an
이런
extreme
자연적인
drought
기한이
in that region.
이스라엘 땅에 내리게 될 것이라고 선언했던 것입니다. 그런데 이 말씀을
However,
선포한 직후에
After
하나님의 말씀이
Elijah
엘리야에게
had
다시
delivered
임합니다.
the word to
자,
Ahab,
2절에서부터 4절까지 같이
let's
한번
read
읽겠습니다.
verse 2 to 4 together.
2절에서부터 4절까지.
1 Kings chapter 17 verses 2 to
시작.
4. Then the word of the Lord came to
엘리야에게
Elijah,
임하여 가라사대,
Leave
너는
here,
여기서 떠나
turn
동으로
eastward,
와서
and
요단아
hide in the
그리스도의
Kirith
가에
Ravin,
숨고
east of the
그리스도의
Jordan.
물을 마시라.
You will
내가
drink
사마귀를
from the
명하여
brook,
거기서
and I have
너를
directed the
먹이게
ravens to
하리라.
supply you with food there.
너는 여기서 떠나
So he said, You will leave here, and you will hide. Will hide where? In Kirith Ravin, east of the Jordan. And God also said, You will drink from the brook, and I have directed ravens to supply you with food. And he promised that. So after Elijah heard this, Elijah obeyed. Let's read verse 5 to 7 together. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kirith Ravin, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. So what the problem is now, the brook had dried up. Sometime later, the brook had dried up. So there's meat and bread, but there's no water. The only drinkable water he had was the brook, and that had dried up. And when we read this, we might throw this question to ourselves. Well, then what? When God was leading Elijah, why would he bring Elijah to a brook that was drying up? If he really, really cherished Elijah, and if he really loved him, then why would he have brought him to a brook that was slowly drying up? Did you ever think this? After we believe in God, we expect some kind of a special blessing that will be given to us. There's no difference between us and the non-believers. We must sometimes think that. And in our hearts, we might have the question, after I became a children of God, well, God should bless me more than the non-believers. However, God doesn't bless me more so that I'm better than the non-believers. I don't get more money. My business isn't better than, and my children aren't smarter than all their kids, you know? So there are sometimes, and like that, Elijah, within his heart, he might have some kind of question like that. However, in the brook, if the water was so full, Elijah wouldn't rely on God. That might have happened.
주여 여기가 좋사오니.
Just like when you look in Matthew chapter 17 verses 4,
지냈을 수도 있었을 것입니다.
James had said,
그런데 중요한 것은 엘리야에게 있어서
Peter had said that,
하나님의
Jesus, why can't we just stay
훈련이었다는
here?
사실입니다.
Just like that, Elijah could have also been like Peter. So, if there was so much water, then he would rely less on God. But then, because God had brought him to a brook that was drying up, Elijah will rely more on God.
삶을 지배했던 가장 중요한 원리 가운데 하나는 이것입니다. 순종의 자리가 축복의 자리이다.
Elijah have always emphasized the fact that the seat of blessing is the seat of obeying. And that was how his life had run too. He was always relying on this word.
엘리야가 가지고 있었던 가장 커다란 관심은 내가 얼마나 좋은 환경 속에서 살아갈 것인가. 그것이 그의 관심이 아니었어요.
So Elijah have always questioned himself by saying, is this the way that God will be leading me to? Where I'm standing is where God had led me, then we have nothing to worry about because God will take on our life and He will make our lives better at no cost. So even though this way had been so hard and there has been so much suffering within our lives, we have to stand where we are and rely on God. So what would Elijah be thinking while he was looking at the brook drying up? Well, Elijah now has only one place to look up to. It's heaven. He needs to look up to God and he needs to rely on God. And God is not right now the only person he could look up to. And from this we could learn a very important lesson. When we live on our lives, sometimes what we have less of could be a blessing. Well, if Elijah had so much stuff and he forgot about God and he relied only on his wealth and of the power that he had, that could be instead a curse, not a blessing. Because I'm healthy, I'm able to live on. If I'm healthy, if I'm able to live away from God, there is no more blessing. If I'm so smart, and I'm so smart that I just deny God and I just live on my life wherever I want to, well, that is not a blessing. And you have to remember that. However, because I know I lack so many things, I rely on God. And because I know I'm weak, I rely on God. And I know that I'm not smart, so I rely on God. And all of these things I lack could become a blessing. So everyone, within the stuff we lack, there is a blessing. Lacking isn't a curse. Instead, is a blessing. So after Elijah went, let's read verses 8 and to 10 of 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 8 to 9. Chapter 17, verses 8 to 9. Then the word of Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So what did God say to Elijah? Elijah was told by God to go to Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there, God has directed a widow there to supply you with food. So after Elijah heard this, if you and I were Elijah, we might have this thought in our head. Well,
백만장자 과부를
Well,
준비하셨구나.
because you know I've suffered so much in the brook, you might lead me to a widow that is a billionaire. But what happens when you go? Let's read verse 10 together. 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 10.
자, 17장 10절 말씀입니다. 자, 시작.
So he went to Zarephath.
사르밧으로 가서
When he came up to a
성문에
town
이르되
gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?"
자, 하나님의 명령을 듣고
So
순종해서
Elijah
사르밧으로
heard
갔습니다.
God's command, so he obeyed and he went to Zarephath.
그런데 아니 백만장자 과부가 왜 나뭇가지를
Well,
줬습니까?
but how can a millionaire widow be picking up sticks?
백만장자 과부가 기다릴 줄 알았는데
Well, he
초라한 여자가
expected there
나뭇가지를
to be a
줬습니다.
someone rich and a billionaire widow, but
마음속에 어떤 생각을
there's
했을까요?
she's gathering sticks. Well,
그럴 리가 없는데.
if it was us, we might have probably thought in our mind,
생각하고
well,
그냥 스쳐 지나갈 수도
we
있었을
might
것입니다.
pass by because we might think, well, no, it can't be, you know. However, Elijah was different.
그 여자가 하나님께서 말씀하신 그 과부일지 모른다는
He
생각을
had
했던
thought
것입니다.
that the widow gathering sticks in front of the gate might be the widow that God
11절 말씀.
told him about. So then,
같이 읽겠습니다.
let's read
시작. 저가 가지러 갈 때
verse 11.
엘리야가
As she was going to get it, he
상품에
called,
내
"And bring me,
손에
please, a
떡
piece of
내게로
bread."
가져오라. 자, 엘리야가 그
So
여자를 불러서
Elijah
물과
called the
떡을
widow
달라고 요청을 합니다.
and asked her for water and bread. And what does the widow reply to? Reply by? Let's read 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 12 together. As surely as the Lord your God lives, he replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die.
뭐 하리라고요?
And die.
그러니까 이 여인이 가지고 있었던 전 재산은
So the
약간의
only thing she had was a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil.
병에 들어있는 약간의 기름. 이 마지막 남은 양식을 먹고 그다음에 어떻게
And
한다고요?
what
죽을 것이라고
she said,
대답합니다.
she will make a meal with what she has and die.
예상이 빗나갔던 엘리야의 충격을 한번 생각해 보세요.
And just think about how shocked Elijah would have been.
그런데 여러분, 우리는 이 말씀을
However,
읽으면서
as we
이렇게
read this
마음속으로
word,
항의하고 싶은 생각이 들지도 모릅니다.
as we read this word, we might think in our hearts, God, that's too much. You made Elijah suffer so much in the brook, but now you should make him more peaceful and make him
가난한 과부,
with no problem,
그 사르밧 과부의 집으로 인도하신다는 말씀입니다.
But then God has led Elijah
그러나 거기에
to
우리는 생각하지
a
못하는
widow living
하나님의
in
기쁜
Zarephath,
뜻이라는 사실을 발견할 필요가 있습니다.
and
다시
you
말씀을
have
드리면
to read. But then there is a deep meaning within this word. To emphasize, God has led Elijah here because he was training him.
자, 그렇다면 사랑하는 여러분, 엘리야가 받아야만 했던 훈련, 그 훈련은 도대체
So
어떤
what kind of a
훈련이었을까요?
training was Elijah getting?
하나님만을
First
의지하는 훈련입니다.
is
하나님만을 의지하는
a training to only rely on God. Only rely on God.
엘리야를 훈련시키는 그 훈련의 첫 번째 내용은 뭐냐면 하나님만을 의지하는 훈련입니다. 그것은 현재 보이는 환경을 의지하지 않고
So
하나님만을
So
의지하는
God,
훈련이었던
it was
것입니다.
a training to not rely on the natural resources we had and what is in our surroundings, but to only rely on God. So if that brook had so much water and it never dried out, then Elijah would have only relied on that brook. However,
그 불안한 환경
however, it was because that the brook was drying out.
바라볼 수가 있었던 것입니다.
Elijah was able to look upon God. And second, where did God rely Elijah to? He led him to Zarephath.
그 사르밧으로 인도하셨는데
But then the problem is, God had led him to Zarephath. However, the widow there that was supposed to support him had only little flour and a little olive oil. That was all the possessions she had.
이렇게 가난한 과부의 집으로 하나님께서
And God had sent Elijah to this poor widow's house. However, if God had sent Elijah to a house that was a house of a billionaire, then what would have happened? Because of that richness, and the wealth that it had, Elijah could have gotten further from God and relied more on the prized possessions of this world. And that means that Elijah can't be used by God. However, because God wanted to use God had given him the training of only relying upon God. So that's why he had kept on leading him to a spot where it was only lacking things. And that was all because he wanted to train him to only rely on God. Only a handful of flour and a little olive oil can't even support one full meal. So Elijah could now only look upon to God, and he could only rely on him. There's no one else to look up to. So Elijah could only look up to God. So now that was all God's plan of the process of making Elijah look up to God. Let's read 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 13 together. Chapter 17 verses 13. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son." So there's only one meal left. It's not even a full meal. However, Elisha says to this widow, first use that and make a bread for him. So if you say it in a figurative speech, then it's like getting a blood out of a turnip. It's like impossible. However, the thing is that this woman had obeyed. She had obeyed to Elijah. And everything she had, she gave it all to Elijah. If we were in that situation, this obeying, really, you can't really obey because that's all she had. The little flour and the little olive oil she had, that was all she had. It's only one meal. However, the woman is using that. But Elijah is asking her to make bread out of her with all she had. But then the woman obeys. And there's a huge miracle when she obeyed. Let's read verse 14 together. Verse 14 to 16 of our main word, 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 14 to 16. Let's read together. "For this is what the Lord of Israel says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." She went and told and did as Elijah told her. So there were food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For a jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. So they ate for many, many days. But then the huge miracle is that the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. So that is the miracle that she experienced when she obeyed to the word. So just like us, sometimes we won't get what God's doing. Well, there will be some time when we will lack things. However, when we listen to God and we obey to the word, then there will be a huge miracle for us as well. If you look at it in the world's point of view, well, that would be, she gave everything she had to Elijah, and she had obeyed to the word. It might think as if she might be losing things. However, if you look at a spiritual point of view, then that means that the woman has obeyed. So then, in the end, there was a miracle.
한꺼번에 마음껏 먹을 수 있는 식량을 주셨다. 하나님께서는 이런 식으로 기적을 베풀어 주지 않았습니다. 오늘 본문을 자세히
So if you look at it, our main passage closely, so she said there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family.
자, 주님이 우리에게 주기문을 가르치실 때 마태복음 6장 11절에 보시면 어떻게 기도하라고 가르치셨습니까?
So when Jesus has taught us to how to pray,
먹고 쓸 수 있는 것을 당장 주시옵소서.
so God had never said that, please give us everything that we need right now. Instead, He had said to pray by saying, give us this our daily bread. He didn't teach us to say, oh, give us what we need now. He said to give our daily bread. He said to pray for that, is daily bread. For Elijah, it may not be a worth of food that he could eat for 10 years and 20 years, but God had given him the food that he could eat for the day. What he could eat for the day. To the widow's family and for Elijah. It might not be full. It might not be, perfect. However, God had given what they need for the day. Are there people that think that you might be lacking things? Well, you should think that it is because God is training me to rely on God. So now, like Elijah, not look at our surroundings and what we don't have. Instead, look up to God and rely on Him. And when we really, really rely on God and only look up to Him, like how God had taken in charge for Elijah and the widow's life, He will do the same for us. So the first training that God had did was the training to only rely on Him, and second was the training of self-sufficiency. So the training of self-sufficiency, I might not have everything. I might not have a full of things. However, my surroundings, I should be thankful for what I have. And that is the training of self-sufficiency. So there's a figure in the New Testament that is living like this, and that is Paul. Let's read Philippians chapter 4 verses 11. Philippians chapter 4 verses 11. Philippians chapter 4 verses 11. Let's read it together. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. So Paul has recognized and has received the blessing to be content. Even though he might be lacking things, he will always think that he's content. And this blessing of content is what I think that should be needed for us too. Let's read 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 7. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verses 7. Let's read it together. For we brought nothing into the world, and we could take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And this is the blessing of content. If you look at verse 7, we have brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. Alexander the Great had once said this before he died. make a hole,
그리고 내가 죽거든
make
그
two
반석에 나를
holes
집어넣고 내 팔을 그
for
구멍
where
속에
I be
나오게
laid in
해.
my grave.
왜 이런 유언을
So why
남겼을까요?
would he said this?
여러분 구멍
So,
속으로 손이 나와 있다. 빈손이라는 얘기, 빈손.
so he wanted to make a hole in his grave so that his two hands could be out. But then that was because to show that he could bring nothing back. Even though I have so much money, even I have thousands of dollars, and I have like millions of diamonds and all the worldly possessions, the thing is that we can't take any of them back. So we need to be content with what you have. So if you only have food and clothing, then we should be content with that. I have what I could eat daily, what I could wear for the day, what I could eat for the day. We should be content and we should live a life of thankfulness because we have that. And we look at verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. I've said before, in the Philippines, Marcos president's wife, it's Imelda.
저하고 성씨가 같아요. 이멜다. 근데 그분이
Imelda, when she was the wife of the president, she had over 3,000 pairs of shoes. If I think, when I thought that if I had only 10 pairs within my full life, then I won't be lacking things. Well, you really only need 2 pairs of shoes, like sneakers and dress shoes. I mean, even if you have that, you could be content. However, if you look at people that believe in Jesus, even if you look at the people that believe in Jesus, you look at the people around you and you compare yourself with that. Like she might have luxury brand clothes, bags, shoes, and then you think you're lacking things. I mean, like that person has so many luxury brand things, but I don't have any. Well, that is not being thankful. That's not being content. If I have what I could wear for the day and what I could eat for the day, then that is content, and you should be thankful that you have that. And this blessing of contentment, even if we lack a little bit of things, we won't be complaining to God about it, and we should only be thankful to Him. And please look to the person next to you and say, let there be a blessing of contentment to you. I have so much things that I have no worry in this world. And because of that, you don't rely on God and you don't pray to God and you live a life of non-believing and you end your life like that. If you die like that, then that is not a blessing God had given you. That is a curse. Because of your worldly positions, and but instead you have so much possessions, you have so much money, and because you give thanks to God and you pray to God more because you're thankful that you have that, then that is a blessing. However, if you don't, then it's not a blessing. Because I lack things, I could look up to God and I could pray to Him. Things I lack, everything that I lack, and things I don't have, then it's not a curse, then it is a blessing because I rely on God because I lack things. And because the fact that I lack things, don't live a life of complaining. And instead, be thankful that God had given you what you could eat for the day, what you could wear for the day, and live a life of thankfulness. Can you really praise God while the brook is drying up? Can you be thankful when you only have a handful of flour and a handful of olive oil left? And can you rely on God?
이 말씀을 통해서
through this word that is given to us today, we need to realize that lacking could be a blessing.
사랑하는 여러분, 저와 여러분이 부족하다는 사실 때문에 불평하지는 않았습니까?
Because we lack things, we can't complain. Why isn't God, we can't complain to God saying, why haven't you given me, so much wealth? Why aren't you giving me a lot of blessing?
그것이 우리의 불평의 목소리는 아니었습니다. 그러나 사랑하는 여러분, 오늘 본문에 등장하는 엘리야와 그리고 사르밧 과부처럼
Just like the widow and Elijah
주여
in the word that we learned today,
불평하지 않겠습니다.
they never complained because they never complained of what they lacked. Instead, they obeyed to the word. And they were thankful that they had a little bit of that. And after this training of only relying to you, please give me a lot of blessing so that I could rely on you to even more and be thankful to you. Please say to the person next to you, after the training, God will fill you up with everything you need. After the training, God will fill you with everything that you need. So until then, I will take on this training. I won't complain of what I don't have. I will only praise you at all times, and I will always be thankful to you no matter what. And so, within all the storms and all the lightnings, even in the moment of suffering, we will be able to live a life of thankfulness. Just like Elijah, that will be the life of us too. Let us pray. Living Father, we thank you. Please let us take this word with our faith and receive this word in thankfulness. Even though my life might lack things, that lacking could be a blessing, and let us believe that. I might not have things, I might not have a perfect life, and however, because I'm weak, then I'm able to rely on you, and that weakness could be a blessing. So even in the seed of inadequacy, let me only rely to you, and let me realize the blessing of contentment. And if I have what I could eat for the day and what I could wear for the day, let me be thankful for that. And after this whole training is done, and let us believe that after this training, you will give us full blessing.